The great library of the Velanthe conquered floated in the empty space between three dying stars. It was the oldest building in the known galaxy. For 400,000 years, the 17 elder species had stored their knowledge here. Every war, every peace treaty, every scientific discovery filled its endless halls. The library was so large that no one had walked through all of it. Some sections had not seen a visitor in 10,000 years. Kellen Voss was young for a Thrin. His people lived for 300 years, and he had seen only 42. His body was covered in hard black shell, and his 4 arms moved quickly as he sorted through ancient data crystals. As a junior archivist, his job was simple and boring. He organized old files that no one would ever read again. But today was different. Deep in a forgotten section of the library, Kellen Voss found a sealed vault. The door was made of metal that no longer existed anywhere in the galaxy. Strange symbols covered its surface. When he touched it, the door recognized something in him and opened with a soft hiss. Inside, he found the precursor archives. The precursors were a mystery that haunted every species in the Conquered. 2 million years ago, they had ruled the galaxy. Their technology was so advanced that even now the elder species could not understand most of it. Then, without warning, they vanished. No war destroyed them. No plague killed them. They simply disappeared, leaving behind empty cities and silent machines. And warnings. They left behind warnings. Kellen Voss activated the first data crystal with shaking hands. A hologram appeared in the air before him. It showed a planet covered in blue water and green land. A small world orbiting an ordinary yellow star in an unremarkable spiral arm of the galaxy. Earth, the recording said in a voice that had not spoken for 2 million years. Home of the species called humans. Kellen Voss leaned forward. He had heard of humans. Everyone had. They were a new species that had just discovered faster-than-light travel about 20 years ago. They were considered primitive and unimportant. The Conquered barely noticed them. But the precursors had noticed them. 2 million years before humans even existed, the precursors had noticed them. We have seen the future, the recording continued. We have looked across time itself, and we have seen what will come from this small blue world. We leave this warning for those who come after us. Listen carefully, for your survival depends on it. The hologram changed. It showed a human. The creature stood on 2 legs. It had no claws, no armor, no natural weapons of any kind. Its skin was soft. Its body was fragile. Kellen Voss almost laughed. This was what the mighty precursors feared. Do not be fooled by their appearance, the recording said, as if reading his thoughts. Earth is what we call a death world. Everything on their planet tries to kill them. The weather, the animals, the plants, even the tiny organisms they cannot see. They should have died 1,000,000 times. They did not. The hologram showed humans hunting. They did not run fast like other predators. Instead, they followed their prey for hours, for days, never stopping, never resting, until the animal simply collapsed from exhaustion. They are persistence hunters. They do not need to be faster or stronger than their prey. They simply never give up. This is not a hunting strategy. This is their entire psychology. They apply it to everything, to war, to science, to love. They do not know how to quit. Kellen Voss felt a strange chill run through his shell. They form bonds, the recording continued. Not just with their own kind, but with anything. They will befriend animals that could kill them. They will love machines. They will adopt members of other species and treat them as family. This bonding instinct is their greatest strength and the source of their danger. When they bond with something, they will die for it. They will kill for it. They will burn worlds for it. The hologram showed more images. Humans standing together against impossible odds. Humans sacrificing themselves for strangers. Humans building, creating, dreaming, always reaching for something more. They weaponize hope, the precursor voice said. They take their pain and transform it into purpose. They take their anger and transform it into justice. They take their fear and transform it into courage. No matter how many times they are beaten down, they rise again. They are the galaxy's chaos variable. They cannot be predicted. They cannot be controlled. The recording flickered and grew serious. To those who find this message, we offer this counsel. Do not ignore the humans. Do not dismiss them as primitives. By the time they reach the stars, it will already be too late to contain them. Your only choices are these: destroy them utterly before they spread, or befriend them completely and pray they accept you. The hologram faded. Kellen Voss sat in the darkness for a long time. 3 days later, he stood before the conquered council. The chamber was vast, filled with representatives from all 17 elder species. The Valanthi floated in their water tanks. The crystalline Morath glittered under the lights. The ancient eldest, beings of pure energy, flickered with impatience. "You waste our time with children's stories," said High Coordinator Vexthan, his purple scales reflecting the chamber lights. "The precursors were brilliant, yes, but they were not gods. They could not see the future." "The warnings are very specific," Kellen Voss insisted. "They describe humans exactly as they are. How could the precursors know this 2 million years ago unless they truly saw what was coming?" "Coincidence," another council member said. "Or perhaps the precursors visited Earth long ago and simply recorded what they saw." "Either way," Vexthan said, "we have nothing to fear from humans. They are children taking their first steps into a galaxy that has belonged to us for millennia. They are primitive. They are short-lived. They are fragile. One of their generations passes in the time it takes us to make a single decision." The council laughed. Kellen Voss did not. "Look at them," Vexthan continued. "They fight among themselves constantly. They damage their own planet with pollution. They cannot even agree on basic facts. These are the beings you want us to fear." Kellen Voss looked at the holographic display showing Earth. Such a small world, such a fragile species. "The precursors ruled this galaxy," he said quietly, "and they vanished. Perhaps we should ask ourselves why they feared something so small." But the council had already moved on to other business. The warnings of the precursors were filed away and forgotten. Kellen Voss returned to the library and began keeping his own records. Somewhere deep in his shell, he knew the truth. The elder species had made a terrible mistake. And by the time they realized it, it would be far too late. 50 years had passed since Kellen Voss discovered the precursor warnings. In that time, humanity had grown from a single world to 12 colonies spread across the stars. They built their ships fast, learned alien technology faster, and asked questions that made the elder species uncomfortable. The Valanthi conquered watched them the way a large animal watches a small insect. Curiosity mixed with mild disgust. Humans were useful, the conquered decided. They worked hard. They adapted quickly. They were willing to do jobs that other species considered beneath them, mining in dangerous asteroid fields, building settlements on hostile worlds, entertaining the elder species with their strange music and stranger stories. But they were not equals. They would never be equals. When the human ambassador, a woman named Maria Santos, stood before the conquered council and requested full membership, the chamber fell silent. Then slowly, the elder species began to laugh. "You are children," High Coordinator Vexthan explained with what he thought was kindness. "Your species has existed for only a moment. Our youngest member has been part of the conquered for 30,000 years. You have been traveling between stars for half a century." "We learn quickly," Maria Santos said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were hard. "That is precisely the problem. You learn, but you do not understand. You take our technology and twist it into weapons. You breed without control. You spread without permission. You are not ready for the responsibility of membership." The council offered humanity protectorate status instead. This meant humans would be protected by the conquered's laws but could not vote on them. They would be safe but never free. They would exist at the pleasure of their betters. Maria Santos accepted the offer. She had no choice. But as she left the chamber, she turned back and spoke words that would later haunt the conquered. "We remember everything," she said. "And we never stop trying." Kellen Voss, now a senior archivist with gray touching his black shell, watched from the visitors' gallery. He thought of the precursor recordings. They do not know how to quit. This is their entire psychology. He began keeping more detailed records. The Krethix Dominion existed beyond the Conquered's borders. They were a species of warriors, tall and muscular with 4 arms and teeth made for tearing meat. They had fought the Conquered to a standstill centuries ago and had hated them ever since. The Dominion watched the humans with great interest. Here was a species the Conquered had insulted, a species with colonies far from any protection, a species that seemed weak and soft and easy to conquer. The Krethix attacked the human colony of New Manila on a bright summer morning. 50,000 Krethix warriors landed on the planet. They expected to find farmers and workers. They expected surrender within hours. They expected to send a message to both the humans and the conquered about the price of weakness. What they found was something else entirely. The humans of New Manila numbered only 8,000, including children and elderly. They had no military training. Their weapons were mining tools and farming equipment. By every measure of warfare, they should have surrendered immediately. They did not surrender. They fought in ways the Krethix had never seen. They hid in tunnels they dug overnight. They set traps using their knowledge of the land. They attacked at night when Krethix eyes could not see well. They refused to face the enemy in open battle where they would surely lose. Instead, they made the enemy bleed for every step. Worse, they did not fight as individuals. They fought as one organism with many bodies. A farmer who had never held a weapon died so that a stranger's children could escape. A teacher who had never known violence gave her life to hold a bridge for 10 minutes. Old men and women who could barely walk picked up weapons and stood their ground. The Krethix did not understand. In their culture, warriors fought for glory and honor. Dying for strangers made no sense. Why would anyone sacrifice themselves for someone they had never met? But the humans did not care if it made sense. They only cared about protecting each other. 3 months later, when conquered observers finally arrived, they found a scene that would change galactic history. The Krethix invasion force was destroyed. 43,000 Krethix warriors were dead. The remaining 7,000 had surrendered, not because they were forced to, but because the humans had treated their prisoners so well that many no longer wanted to fight. The human survivors were already rebuilding. They were planting crops in soil still stained with blood. They were constructing homes from the wreckage of Krethix ships. Children were playing in streets where battles had raged days before. And they were caring for Krethix orphans. The war had left many young Krethix without parents. The humans, instead of killing them or abandoning them, had adopted them. Krethix children ate at human tables, played with human children, called human mothers by the word for mother in their own language. The conquered council reviewed the reports with confusion. "This makes no sense," said Vexthan. "They should have been destroyed. The numbers do not lie. This was an impossible victory." Perhaps, one council member suggested, the Krethix were simply incompetent. The council accepted this explanation. It was easier than considering the alternative. Kellen Voss read the reports differently. He cross-referenced them with everything he had learned about humans in 50 years of study. He compared them to the precursor warnings he had discovered long ago. When they bond with something, they will die for it. They will kill for it. They will burn worlds for it. The humans of New Manila had bonded with each other. They had bonded with their colony. They had even bonded with the children of their enemies. And so they had done the impossible. Kellen Voss began writing a new warning. He sent copies to every member of the council. He begged them to read the precursor archives. He pleaded with them to take humanity seriously before it was too late. No one listened. They called him obsessed. They called him fearful. They said the Battle of New Manila was nothing but luck and Krethek's failure. Humans were still primitive. Humans were still weak. Humans were still beneath their notice. On the ruined fields of New Manila, Maria Santos stood with the colony's survivors. She was old now, her hair white and her body tired. But her eyes still held that same hardness they had shown the council 50 years ago. "They think this was a fluke," she said to the humans and Kretheks around her. "They think we got lucky." A young Kretheks warrior who had surrendered and then stayed to help rebuild looked at her with something like wonder. "Will you tell them the truth?" Maria Santos smiled. It was not a kind smile. "No," she said, "we will show them, and by the time they understand it will be far too late." Somewhere in the great library, Kellen Voss added another entry to his secret files. He was beginning to understand what the precursors had known 2 million years ago. The elder species were not watching humans grow. They were watching humans prepare. 100 years had passed since humanity first reached the stars. The small species from the unremarkable blue world now held 60 planets. Their population had grown to 15 billion. Their technology, once primitive copies of conquered designs, had evolved into something new and disturbing. Conquered scientists studied human ships with growing unease. The humans had not simply copied their technology, they had improved it. They had asked questions no one had thought to ask. They had combined systems that were never meant to work together. Their engines were faster. Their weapons were more efficient. Their medical technology had extended their short lives by decades. Worse than their technology were their alliances. 3 species had joined humanity's new confederation. The vril, aquatic beings the conquered had used for manual labor and underwater mining. The Kethani, small furry creatures the elder species kept as entertainers and servants. The Morvax, silicon-based life forms everyone had assumed, were too alien to communicate with. These species had been part of the conquered for thousands of years. They had been content with their positions, or so the elder species had thought. Then the humans came and treated them as equals. The humans learned the vril language and sang their songs. They played games with Kethani children and helped build schools on their homeworld. They spent years developing translation technology just to understand what the Morvax were trying to say. When they finally succeeded, they discovered the Morvax were poets who had been screaming beautiful verse into the void for centuries, ignored by everyone. One by one, these forgotten species looked at humanity and saw something they had never seen from the conquered: respect, genuine friendship, the radical idea that all thinking beings had value. The conquered council grew concerned, not about the humans specifically, but about the disruption they were causing. The elder species had maintained order for 400,000 years. They had rules. They had hierarchies. They had systems that worked. Humanity was breaking those systems simply by existing. "We must regulate their expansion," High Coordinator Vexthan declared. He was old now, even by Velanthe standards, but he still controlled the council. "They grow too quickly. They influence species that should know their place. This cannot continue." The council agreed. They sent a diplomatic message to the Human Confederacy. The message was simple: stop expanding, return your allied species to conquered control, and accept observation teams on all human worlds. The human response came from President James Okafor, a descendant of the original colonists of New Manila. His message was equally simple: no. The conquered assembled its fleet, 20,000 warships from a dozen species, commanded by admirals who had fought wars before humans existed. They represented 400,000 years of military tradition and experience. They expected the humans to surrender immediately. They expected a quick show of force followed by negotiations. They expected to teach these children their place in the galaxy. What happened instead would be remembered as the shattering. The human fleet was smaller, only 3,000 ships, but those ships moved in ways the Conquered had never seen. They communicated without signals the Conquered could detect. They coordinated without any visible command structure. They fought not as individual vessels but as a single living thing. In 6 weeks, the Conquered's military infrastructure collapsed. Human forces did not destroy the enemy fleets. Instead, they targeted supply lines, communication stations, and command centers. They struck where no one expected and vanished before counterattacks could arrive. They used weapons no one had seen before, missiles that hacked enemy computers, bombs that disabled ships without killing crews, signals that turned automated defenses against their owners. But the strangest thing, the thing that truly terrified the elder species, was what happened after battles ended. Human ships rescued enemy survivors. Human doctors treated wounded Conquered soldiers. Human commanders visited prisoner camps not to interrogate but to ensure proper treatment. Captured soldiers received the same food as human soldiers, the same medical care, the same basic dignity. Many captured soldiers did not want to go home. Admiral Crixven of the Velanthe Third Fleet was taken prisoner after his flagship was disabled. He expected torture, interrogation, execution. Instead, he was given a comfortable room, good food, and regular visits from a human officer who simply wanted to talk. "Why are you doing this?" Crixven demanded after a week. "We are your enemies. We tried to destroy you." The human officer, a young woman named Sarah Chen, smiled at him. "You were following orders from leaders who never saw you as anything but tools. That does not make you our enemy. It makes you another victim." Crixven did not understand. In 400 years of military service, no one had ever spoken to him like this. No one had ever seen him as anything but his rank and species. "What do you want from us?" he asked. Sarah Chen's smile grew sad. "We want you to be free, all of you, not just humans, everyone. We want a galaxy where no species is born into servitude, where no thinking being is told they are worth less because of what they are." "That is impossible," Crixven said. "There has always been hierarchy. There will always be hierarchy." "Perhaps," Sarah Chen agreed. "Or perhaps it only seems impossible because no one has tried hard enough to change it. We are very good at trying, Admiral. We never stop." Across the galaxy, similar conversations were happening. Human soldiers befriending former enemies. Human diplomats offering peace terms that seemed impossibly generous. Human families adopting war orphans of any species. The Conquered's greatest admirals could not develop strategies against this. Every military doctrine they knew assumed enemies would behave like enemies. The humans did not. They behaved like stubborn, optimistic fools who believed everyone could be better. And terrifyingly, they were often right. Kellen Voss finally received his audience with the full council. He was ancient now, his shell cracked and gray, supported by machines that kept his old body moving. But his mind was still sharp, and his records were complete. He stood before the leaders of 17 species, and read aloud from the precursor warnings he had discovered so long ago. "They will not conquer you with hate," he read, his voice echoing through the silent chamber. "They will conquer you with love. They will make you question everything you believe about power and hierarchy and worth. They will show you kindness when you expect cruelty. They will offer friendship when you expect domination. And in the end, you will not be conquered at all. You will be transformed. You will join them willingly, gratefully, and you will thank them for it." The council members looked at each other with growing horror. "This is why the precursors disappeared," Kellen Voss continued. "Not because the humans destroyed them, but because they became something new, something better. The precursors saw the future and they chose to be part of it." High Coordinator Vexthan Scales had turned pale. "What are you saying, Archivist?" Kellen Voss looked at the being who had dismissed his warnings for over a century. There was no satisfaction in being right, only sorrow. "I am saying that we never had a chance," he replied. "From the moment humans reached the stars, this outcome was certain. The only question was how long it would take us to understand." Outside the council chambers, across 1,000 worlds, the old order was already crumbling. Species that had been part of the conquered for millennia were asking new questions. Why do we serve? What is our worth? Could things be different? And everywhere they looked, they saw humans offering a simple, terrifying answer. Yes, things can be different. Come with us, and we will show you how. The war ended not with victory celebrations or peace treaties, but with a quiet realization that spread across the galaxy like morning light. The Valanthi conquered, which had ruled for 400,000 years, simply stopped existing. No one conquered it. No one destroyed it. Species that had been members for longer than humanity had existed simply decided they did not want to be members anymore. They wanted something else. They wanted what the humans had offered. The petitions began arriving at Human Confederacy headquarters within days of the war's end. First came the Vril, the Kethani, and the Morvax, species that had already joined humanity's alliance. Then came others. The Thrin, Kellen Voss's people, known for their logic and careful thought. The Selvani, whose artists had inspired civilizations across 1,000 worlds. The Korthax, warriors who had fought alongside the conquered for millennia. One by one, they came to humanity and asked the same question: "May we join you?" The humans said yes to all of them. High Coordinator Vexthan watched his life's work crumble from his chambers in the council building. The Great Hall, once filled with representatives of 17 species, now echoed with emptiness. Only a few elder species remained, those too proud or too afraid to accept what was happening. A young Valanthi aide approached him carefully. "Coordinator, the human ambassador has requested a meeting." Vexthan's scales rippled with emotions he could not name: anger, fear, something that might have been shame. "Send her away." "Sir, she says she only wants to talk. She says there is no need for enemies anymore." For a long moment Vexthan said nothing. Then slowly he nodded. "Bring her." The human ambassador was a woman named Alina Reyes. She walked into the empty council chamber with quiet steps, taking in the vast space that had once held the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Her eyes were kind but tired. She had seen much in the last years, too much. "High Coordinator," she said with a small bow, "thank you for seeing me." "Why are you here?" Vexthan demanded. "You have won, you have taken everything. What more do you want?" Alina Reyes sat down across from him, uninvited. She moved like someone who had stopped caring about ancient rules of behavior. "I want you to understand something. We did not do this to you. We did not take anything. The conquered is destroyed." "The conquered destroyed itself," Alina said gently. "You built an alliance based on hierarchy, on power, on the idea that some species were worth more than others. That works for a while, maybe even for hundreds of thousands of years. But eventually the species at the bottom start asking questions. Eventually they see another way." Vexthan's claws scraped against his chair. "And you showed them this other way." "We showed them what we believe, that every thinking being has value, that friendship is stronger than fear, that the galaxy is big enough for everyone." She paused. "We did not make them leave you, Coordinator. We simply offered them a choice they had never had before." In another part of the galaxy, Admiral Crixven stood in a crowd of mixed species on a planet called New Hope. Humans had built this world from nothing in just 20 years. Now it served as the new capital of a growing confederation that included former conquered species and their former enemies. Beside him stood Captain Sarah Chen, the human officer who had guarded him during his imprisonment. They had become friends in the years since the war. More than friends. Crixven had taken an oath of brotherhood with her, according to the ancient Valanthi traditions. "I still do not fully understand you," Crixven admitted, watching a group of human children play with young Krethix and Thrin. You should hate us. We tried to control you. We treated you as lesser beings. Sarah smiled. We do not have time for hate, Admiral. Life is too short. Your lives are short, Crixven agreed, yet you accomplish so much. Maybe that is why, Sarah said. We know we will not live forever, so we try to make things better for those who come after us. We build not for ourselves but for our children, and for your children, and for the children of species we have not even met yet. On the Thrin homeworld, Kellen Voss prepared for his meeting with Alina Reyes. He was very old now. Over 300 years. His body was failing despite the best medical care, but his mind remained clear and he had one more duty to perform. The human ambassador arrived at his archive chambers surrounded by aides and translators. But when she saw the ancient Thrin waiting for her, she dismissed them all. Archivist Kellen Voss, she said warmly, I have wanted to meet you for a long time. They say you were the first to take the precursor warning seriously. Kellen Voss gestured with a trembling arm toward a display showing the ancient recordings. I found them 150 years ago. I tried to warn everyone. No one listened. Would it have changed anything if they had? The old Thrin considered this question carefully. I do not think so. The warnings were not instructions on how to defeat you. They were simply observations about what you are, and what you are cannot be fought with weapons or strategies. Alina Reyes sat down beside him, studying the precursor hologram that still showed that small blue world called Earth. What are we, Archivist, in your opinion, after all these years of study? Kellen Voss was quiet for a moment. Then he activated a recording he had saved long ago. They weaponize hope, the precursor voice said. They take their pain and transform it into purpose. That, Kellen Voss said. You are beings who refuse to accept that things cannot be better. You look at a galaxy full of suffering and injustice, and instead of accepting it as natural, you try to change it. Alina laughed softly. It was a sad sound. The precursors made us sound like monsters. No, Kellen Voss replied. They made you sound like exactly what you are. They simply could not explain it properly because there were no words for what you represent. You are not conquerors. You are not liberators. You are something new, a species that makes other species want to be better. He pulled up the final section of the precursor warnings, the part that had always confused him most. They were not warning us about monsters, Alina Reyes read aloud, her voice gentle. They were warning us about hope, about change. She looked at Kellen Voss with eyes that held centuries of weariness and yet still sparkled with something undefeated. We are not special, Archivist. We are just a species that never learned to stop trying. We fail constantly. We hurt each other constantly. But we never stop believing that tomorrow can be better than today. Kellen Voss reached out and touched her hand with his worn claw. In 400 years, he had never voluntarily touched a member of another species. It had simply never occurred to him. Now it felt like the most natural thing in the galaxy. I spent my whole life studying you, he said, trying to understand the threat you represented, and in the end I understand only this: you were never the threat. We were the threat to ourselves, our pride, our rigid hierarchies, our refusal to see other species as equals. Alina squeezed his hand gently, and now. The old Thrin looked around at his archives, at a lifetime of records documenting humanity's rise. Then he looked at the human ambassador who had come to him not as a conqueror, but as a friend. Now, Kellen Voss said, we learn to hope. Outside, the galaxy continued to change. Old enemies became new friends. Ancient barriers fell. And everywhere, in every corner of known space, species that had never spoken were learning to understand each other. The humans had not conquered the galaxy. They had simply reminded it how to dream. 200 years had passed since humanity first reached the stars. The galaxy that existed now would have been unrecognizable to those who lived in the time of the Velanthi conquered. The rigid hierarchies were gone. The ancient rules that separated species by worth and power had faded into history. In their place grew something wild and beautiful and utterly chaotic. On world after world, species that had never spoken now lived side by side. A Thrin scientist worked alongside a human engineer and a Krethix philosopher to solve problems that had puzzled civilizations for millennia. Velanthi artists created music with Kethani dancers and Morvax poets. Children of a dozen species played together in streets where their grandparents would have fought wars. It was messy. It was loud. Arguments happened constantly about culture and tradition and the proper way to do things. Old hatreds sometimes flared up, old wounds reopened. But always, something remarkable happened. The arguments led to understanding. The wounds healed stronger than before. The mess somehow organized itself into something that worked better than the careful order that had come before. At the center of it all, stubbornly, infuriatingly, gloriously, humans remained human. They still died young by galactic standards. A century and a half was a long life for them now, thanks to medical advances, but that was still a heartbeat compared to species that lived for thousands of years. They still threw themselves into danger without thinking. They still formed bonds with anything and anyone, whether those bonds made sense or not. They still believed with absolute conviction that tomorrow could be better than today. President Amara Akafer, great-great-granddaughter of the hero of New Manila, addressed the Galactic Assembly on the 200th anniversary of First Contact. The Assembly Hall held representatives from 47 species, far more than the conquered had ever united. "When we first came to the stars," she said, "you called us primitives, you called us children. You were not entirely wrong. We were young. We were reckless. We made mistakes that a wiser species would have avoided." The Assembly listened in silence. Many of them had been alive when humanity first appeared. They remembered thinking these small creatures from a death world would never amount to anything. "But you missed something," Amara continued. "You saw our short lives as weakness. We saw them as motivation. You saw our emotions as chaos. We saw them as strength. You saw our stubborn refusal to accept things as they were as foolishness. We saw it as hope." She looked out at the gathered representatives, beings of light and crystal and water and flesh, united in a way that would have seemed impossible 2 centuries ago. "We did not conquer you. We would never want to conquer you. We simply showed you what we believe, that every thinking being matters, that friendship is worth dying for, that the universe is not a hierarchy to be climbed but a community to be built. Some of you joined us because you agreed. Some of you joined us because you had no other choice. But now, after 200 years, I hope you understand that we never wanted subjects or servants." Her voice softened. "We wanted family." In the restored precursor archives on the Thrin homeworld, a ceremony was taking place. New translations had finally decoded the last section of the ancient warnings, a section that had been corrupted for 2 million years. The ceremony was led by archivist Ven-Kellen, direct descendant of Kellen-Voss. She stood before a gathering that included humans, Thrin, Velanthi, Krethix, and a dozen other species. Among them was James Chen-Crix, whose grandmother had been Sarah Chen and whose grandfather had been the Velanthi Admiral Crix-Ven. He carried both their memories in his mixed blood. "For 2 centuries," Ven-Kellen announced, "we have wondered why the precursors disappeared. They ruled this galaxy. They had technology beyond anything we can imagine. And then they simply vanished, leaving behind only warnings about a species that did not yet exist." She activated the final recording. A precursor hologram appeared, the first time anyone had seen what these ancient beings actually looked like. They were tall and slender, with skin that shifted colors like liquid metal. They had 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern. They looked both alien and somehow familiar. "We have seen the future," the precursor said. "We have looked across the long years and seen what will come from the small blue world, and we have made our choice." The hologram shifted, showing images of precursor cities. But they were not abandoned. They were full of life, precursors living alongside other species, species that had not existed 2 million years ago. "We did not flee from the humans," the recording continued. "We joined them, not in their time but in ours. We looked at what we were, a civilization of hierarchy and control not unlike your conquered, and we looked at what they would become. We saw the change they would bring, the chaos, the friendship, the hope." The precursor smiled. It was a strange expression on such an alien face, but unmistakably warm. "And we chose to begin that change early. We dissolved our empire. We freed our subject species. We scattered across the galaxy not as rulers but as neighbors. By the time you find this message, we will have been living among you for millions of years. We will have evolved alongside you. We will have become part of the galaxy we helped to build." The assembly was silent. James Chenkrix felt tears running down his face. Beside him, a Thrin elder trembled with emotion that her species rarely showed. "These warnings are not meant to save you from humanity," the precursor concluded. "They are meant to prepare you for what comes next. When the humans come, do not resist. Do not fear. Embrace them, for they carry the fire that will light the galaxy's next age." The hologram flickered and added one final message, one that had never been recorded in any of the copies Kellen Voss had found. "We are still here. We have always been here. Look around you at the galaxy you have built together. Look at the friends standing beside you. Look at the hope in your hearts. That is our legacy. That is humanity's gift. That is what we all become when we stop fighting and start building." The recording ended. Van Kellen looked at the mixed crowd before her, species that had once been enemies, now standing together as family. She thought of her ancestor, who had spent his entire life trying to warn the galaxy about humanity. He had been right, she realized, and he had been wrong. Humanity was exactly as dangerous as the precursors had warned. They were chaos variables. They were persistence hunters. They weaponized hope and befriended everything they touched. But the danger was never destruction. The danger was transformation. The danger was that once you knew humans, you could never go back to what you were before. You would be infected with their stubborn optimism. You would start believing that tomorrow could be better. You would start seeing strangers as potential friends. You would become, in some small way, human yourself. And that, Van Kellen understood at last, was exactly what the galaxy had needed all along. Outside the archive, the sun was setting on the Thrin homeworld. James Chenkrix walked with Van Kellen through gardens where Thrin, human, and a dozen other species sat together, talking, laughing, sharing food and stories. "Do you think the precursors are really still out there?" he asked, "living among us?" Van Kellen looked at the young man whose ancestors had been both human and Valanthi, species that should have been enemies. She looked at the garden full of impossible friendships. She thought about the galaxy that had emerged from chaos and war to become something beautiful. "I think," she said slowly, "that it does not matter. The precursors saw what humanity would bring to the galaxy. They chose to embrace it rather than fight it, and look at what we have built together." She gestured at the gathering, at the laughter and conversation, at children of different species chasing each other through the flowers. "Perhaps the real question is not whether the precursors are still here. Perhaps the question is whether we are worthy of what they saw in us, whether we can keep building this future together." James smiled, a very human expression that had somehow spread to every species in the galaxy. "I think we can. We just have to keep trying." The sun set. The stars came out. And across a galaxy transformed by hope and stubbornness and love, countless species looked up at the same sky and dreamed of tomorrow. They never stopped trying. They never stopped hopping. They had learned that from the humans. and it was the greatest gift anyone had ever given them.